Hi, I'm Robert Wright. I run the Non-Zero Foundation, which produces all the shows on Blogging Heads TV and Meaning of Life TV. We host a variety of voices, some of them pretty unorthodox, and we encourage dialogue that is sharp but civil. We think fostering constructive conversation is especially important now that America and the world are looking kind of fragile. If you agree that our mission is important, I hope you'll consider helping us shoulder the cost. You can do that by becoming one of our cherished patrons at patreon.com/nonzero foundation. That's NONZEROFOUNDATION. Thanks. We need your help, and we deeply appreciate it.
Crispin Sartwell, good to see you.
Good to see you, Dan.
Welcome to everyone in the Sophia audience, Blogging Heads .tv, meaningoflife.tv. This is the Sophia program. I'm Daniel Kaufman, your host. I'm a professor of philosophy at Missouri State University. I'm joined by Crispin Sartwell, associate professor of philosophy at Dickinson College. Crispin.
Wait, let me put in my earpieces.
That's fine. I see. I have this very fancy thing.
Okay, I'm coming.
Okay.
Oh, look, you got a mic, man.
Yeah, I've got the whole, and it's directional, so it doesn't pick up noise from you. So that's why I don't have to wear headphones. All right. So Crispin and I, aside from our famous legendary friendship, we follow each other on Twitter. We follow each other on Twitter, and
it's scary.
Every now and then we'll get into little exchanges over things. You know, Crispin will post something and I'll comment on it, or I'll post something and he'll say something. And this time around, it was something to do, I don't remember how it started, but it was something that somebody did something with regard to standpoint epistemology or standpoint theory, and I had a bunch of things to say about it, and Crispin had a bunch of things to say about it, and I said, hey, why don't we do something on this? Crispin tends to view it favorably, standpoint theory. I tend to not view it favorably. I wrote a little essay summarizing my objections to it, and I invited Crispin. I said, look, why don't we talk about this? So that's what we're here to do. We're here to talk about standpoint theory, standpoint epistemology, as it's sometimes called. Now, Crispin, yeah, go ahead, please. Anything you want.
Okay, I just want to. I'm going to say one thing here, and I think this matters more from one of the standpoints that we're going to articulate than another. But standpoint epistemology would suggest that we should acknowledge who we are right here. Okay, and this, you may find this irritating. I'm not sure, or if you will, or not. But it's going to be okay. So this is a discourse that emerges from feminist theory and critical race theory, and we are two white guys, similar backgrounds, really, in a lot of ways, somewhat different ages and things. And that might make a difference, okay? So if all knowledge is situated in those kind of ways, then it might be good to situate what we're doing a little bit or provisionally, or I guess it's a question whether that matters or not. But I thought that's worth saying earlier.
Well, that will come up. I mean, that's what we're talking about, and about the relevance of these sort of identifications to one's epistemic standing. But just on the matter of the history, let me ask you, and you may know this better than me, given your background, but I was under the impression that the origins of this is actually Marxism, and it having to do with the privileged perspective of the working classes with respect to their own oppression, as opposed to those in the managerial classes. So I didn't think that this originated with feminism and critical race theory. I thought this was originally a Marxist, part of the hermeneutics of suspicion circle that you get in Marx and others. Is that not correct?
Well, I'll tell you what, I guess I came across it I was introduced to it by my girlfriend, who was a feminist theorist in the early 90s. I don't know, man. Like it's easy to set a foot wrong here, but lovely person.
Does it not originate though?
I was introduced to it in terms of Haraway, Donna Haraway, and Sandra Harding, and a couple of other figures, as having developed in the 80s. Now, they attributed the ideas often, or trace the ideas to Marx.
Okay.
And to Hegel, the master-slave dialectic in Hegel, which runs a kind of similar structure or whatever. Right. I think, but in terms of like calling something standpoint epistemology and trying to develop it as a kind of distinctive track within the academic discourse, I think it's feminism in the 80s where that comes to be named. But yeah, they attribute it to kind of Marxist theory, and it is definitely connected to the standpoint of the proletariat in relation to capitalism.
Yeah.
As Marx conceived that or whatever, yeah.
Yeah. I thought that it went back to Marx because it originates as a kind of a critique or in reaction to the Enlightenment conception of sort of objectivity or neutrality or the epistemic norms of the Enlightenment. I thought it was sort of a reaction against saying, no, that's bullshit. There's no disinterested rational stance. Everybody's coming from a position, and that affects your epistemic standing and so on and so forth. And now it's just a matter of working the details out of how exactly it affects your epistemic standing and all of that.
Right. And if you want to read that from a certain strand of Marxism, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't.
And I don't. Let me immediately distance myself. I am not evoking some kind of, this kind of Jordan Peterson cultural Marxism. That's not the point of this. Is not to slur it. I have plenty. I just wanted to know where I was under the impression it originated in the Marxist critique of this idea of neutral reason or disinterested, epistemic disinterestedness that comes out of the Enlightenment and that imagines a kind of an idealized epistemic subject.
Yes, but note with regard to Marx himself, he himself makes all these kinds of scientific claims for his own economics and so on, right?
Yeah.
Like, in other words, he definitely doesn't develop any kind of systematic standpoint, and really he's pretty embedded in the Enlightenment.
Yeah, fair enough.
Though he yields resources for a critique, right?
Yeah.
Like of privileged standpoints and stuff. But
Brian Leiter has this paper on the hermeneutics of suspicion where he talks about Marx and Freud and I think who's the third? Is it Lyotard? Nietzsche. I'm sorry, Nietzsche.
Yeah.
And I was under the impression that this represents the beginning, provides the conceptual ingredients that then make for this sort of strong standpoint epistemology. But if I'm wrong about that, I'm happy to drop it.
I think a lot of strands are running into it. It's a pretty complex story. Okay. Like I say, as a named tendency within like epistemological theory and philosophy of science, I ran into it as a feminist thing, attributing it to Marx partly.
Yeah, certainly today, it's evoked primarily in feminist context and in race-oriented context.
Yes,
and so that's what we're going to be primarily talking about. In terms of our obligatory self-identifications, so. This is worth sort of part of maybe talking about for a second. I guess one thing I would ask, and this actually is not in the criticisms I sent you and the objections I sent you, but this is something I would ask and sort of like, what determines these identifications? So you just identified us.
Yes.
Now, if I reject that identification,
yes,
what is the basis of settling a dispute between us? If someone I'm arguing with about, let's say, racism, and let's say that person is black or Hispanic or and they identify me as white, and I reject that characterization, I say, no, I'm not. Right? Is that supposed to be an empirical matter? I'm just curious because it sounds to me like a power game from the beginning. From step one, it's a positioning exercise because I could turn around and say, it's funny you call me white. We weren't white enough for the Germans.
Right, I understand.
The Germans gassed my entire family for not being white. So what do you mean I'm white?
I have a similar background.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what makes us white exactly?
I mean, I think this is a complex story, and I think you can introduce ambiguities and vagueness, and a lot of times this kind of discourse loses the rough edges and things like this. But I do think that you and me walking down the streets of American City are easily identified as white. I think we've been treated as white throughout our lives. Okay. I don't know if you agree with that. I mean, and I don't know what that means exactly. Like it's going to have to be a hard, long story about what that means. But I think that it's a social reality in the sense that it's about how we are regarded. And it comes to be a part of how we regard ourselves, whether conscious or unconscious, in all sorts of ways. Like these are central social categories. They're in circulation. It's the same with our genders, man. Like we are easily identified as men, and this means all kinds of stuff. And like I can reject that, but I'm going to have to really work at shifting my reception as a man.
You don't need to work at all. All you need to do is self-identify as trans, and you can now spend the rest of your life brutalizing other people on social media for misgendering you, right? And you can get people fired from their jobs, and you can, listen, you've had this done to you along a different axis, right? I mean, I guess a part of me is really very surprised that you're a fan of this sort of thing, given that it seems to me you've been a target within the orbit of this sort of
no, that's true.
Discourse.
That's quite true. And I feel kind of misunderstood in some ways about that because I have all these sympathies with all these moves. Okay, but I tend to get really upset when people are trying to shut other people up or whatever, or no matter what position they're taking, basically.
Right.
But yeah,
let's not be. And I want to not flail around because this is the sort of thing I can react to everything, and we can go off on every tangent.
Right. Exactly.
I just did want to register that I guess I am going to resist a little bit this idea that somehow it's just sort of these categorizations that we should be put into are just sort of obvious. And I'm curious about who curates these assignments. If you asked me, look, a lot of the benefits supposedly of me being white, let's say, right, in a place like Springfield, Missouri, aren't that apparent to me, because in Springfield, Missouri, it's not just about being white; it's about being Christian, right? And my daughter suffered a lot of the kind of discrimination that you would normally assign to minorities. Yes. Because we're white, but we're not Christian, right?
I was raised trying to raise Jewish kids in Nashville and Tuscaloosa there for a while, things like that. Maybe a similar experience. Look, that's all true. And I think like I say, these things are enormously complex on the ground. And I don't think any of these realities are simple or obvious. Okay. And I think that all these categories are contested, and who is not white is constantly up for grabs, and it's constantly cycling. Okay. And these are very volatile categories. And there are many cases where you could like look at someone or think about someone and not know what to say. Okay. And that happens all the time.
Yeah.
So at any level that you're talking about this, where you're arranging groups and talking about what groups can know from the particular standpoint or experiences they have as groups, you're engaged in a really kind of a super problematic, I guess to make this point, like I'm going to operate with the race and gender categories that are seemingly current or something like this, but I gotta want to always use them in a way like that acknowledges how problematic they are and how historically volatile they are, and stuff like that. But I'm gonna insist on some kind of white privilege Okay. Like, I think this happens all the time in many different ways. I think we're probably treated quite differently than other kinds of people in the criminal justice system, for instance.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll get to that, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I guess so. I'll just, because this is not a mystery novel, so I'll just give my conclusion, and then let's define it. So, but my conclusion at the end of the day is my position. You just said you're going to insist on some sort of white privilege. I'm going to insist that any talk of privilege or standpoints is only credible and intelligible at the level of the individual, that it makes no sense whatsoever at the group level. And I think I'm going to demonstrate that. Okay. I think I'm going to demonstrate that. Let's put it this way. I don't believe that there is any meaningful sense in which a coal miner in Appalachia is privileged relative to a black student at Yale. Okay. I just don't. And I'll argue it. I mean, I'll argue it on the detailed level, including criminal justice. I will argue it. So, but let's get to that point.
All right. So yeah,
what standpoint theory? So
what standpoint theory? Yeah.
Okay. I have a quote from Rebecca Kukla, who publishes a lot in this area, and you can add or subtract to it as you like. But this is what what I was working with in the essay. So I'm quoting now. And I'll have a link to the article in the link section. Quote: most standpoint theorists have insisted upon two claims. One, that some contingent features of knowers can give them not only different but better or more objective knowledge than others have. And two, that social positions of marginalization and structural disadvantage, such as those inhabited by women, African Americans of the working class, yield epistemological advantages, giving those who occupy them the potential to see truths that are inaccessible from the point of view of the dominant center. So that's the definition I was working with in the essay. Do you want to add or subtract anything from that?
I'm pretty comfortable with that. Like I say, the sources I originally had for this are Sandra Harding and Donna Haraway. And I think that's basically, with maybe some refinements and some differences of terminology, basically the idea. Absolutely.
Okay.
It's a nicely ironic reversal of privilege, if there's any such thing as privilege, group privilege, right? By saying, like, it's actually the subaltern side of this. This is why it's kind of Hegelian dialectic is potentially in play, this kind of stuff. That's privileged. It's the culturally or economically underprivileged who are epistemically privileged by this standpoint.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So that's the claim. And as I said in the piece, and I don't know whether you're going to want to make any hay of this, but as I said in the piece, I'm really not interested in whether sort of we can develop intellectually a purely abstract, clean version of this that can respond to all the objections I might offer. What I'm really interested in is how this is being deployed in contemporary political discourse. It's being deployed primarily for purposes of discursive positioning, right? And that is, we're being told that we should center these voices, and we should quiet these other voices, right? So the traditionally dominant should shut up, and the traditionally oppressed should talk. And the reason that we should do that is because the traditionally oppressed have knowledge and epistemic positioning that the dominant don't have, and therefore they're more likely to say true things about these subjects, and so on and so forth. Do you accept that that's the sort of way this is being used?
Yes. Now, I as you're not really maybe that interested in articulating the most ideal version of this.
Go ahead.
I'm not that. I'm not willing to take responsibility for every application of it, right? You see what I'm saying? Even if I'm representing the point of view at the moment.
You don't want to be in a position. You don't want to be in a position in one of these. Well, every time it's been tried, it's been terrible. But don't worry. There's
no.
We haven't tried the real version yet, right? I mean, you don't want to do that.
I think there's important concrete insights that are being applied and could be applied profitably.
So do you defend
along those lines?
Do you defend this sort of discursive use of it? Center X voices and quiet these other voices.
Yeah. Yes. Not every application of it. Okay. And I'm not advocating any particular person's firing. As editor of the opinion page of the New York Times.
No, I'm not going to saddle you with anything like that. I mean, just more like.
No. Yes.
We should all put on our name tags. We have our identifications, and that should determine to some degree in whatever discursive space we're in, who talks and who doesn't, and who talks first and who talks second, and whose talk is taken to be taken more seriously. Because that's what this all cashes out into. I don't care if people have some abstract notion of where they stand or whatever. You can think you stand wherever the hell you want. The question is whether if we're having a conversation.
Yeah.
I'm going to be made to listen to you and I'm going to be silenced. That's the question, right? Or my voice is going to be put secondary to your voice on the grounds of this.
Right. Like I said, I'm not personally advocating silencing anybody. But I could be advocating, I could understand advocating centralizing or emphasizing or trying to bring forth certain kinds of voices.
What does that mean in practical terms? Give me an example.
Okay, let's try this. Here's a problematic example from both of our points of view, probably. Like, here's a tough example I've just been thinking about for a little while. And this could be used to critique standpoint epistemology, but I think it also shows interesting things about it. The 1619 Project at the New York Times. Okay? Or just to some extent what's happening at the New York Times, which I admit is very disturbing. In a lot of ways, okay, within opinion journalism and stuff, let's say, and other matters. Okay, so look, I think, what if we thought of it this way? We're going to turn over the magazine to black interpretations of the role of slavery in American history. Okay? Now, there might be a false sentence or two in that package or whatever it is, or you might not like the emphasis, right? Like the idea that the basic American culture, in a way, maybe was founded with at the beginning of slavery. Now, that's an incredibly provocative, and it has been people have been incredibly provoked by that thesis, or however we want to describe that. The founding was in 1619 with the first importation of slaves, not in 1776.
You do know that they're all like backpedaling now and saying that wasn't the thesis, and that the New York Times has actually gone backwards and erased.
I do.
That doesn't make you suspicious at all?
It makes me quite suspicious. I mean, I think it's a complicated terrain, but I also think that is it's a provocative and fascinating thesis. And I don't think you're going to get it from Sean Wilentz, right?
Well, you're not going to get it from credible historians. That's the point. I mean, that gets to part of what we're going to talk about. And that is that we're not supposed to think that this sort of racial identity now trumps actual expertise in the subject, right? Actual scholarly expertise in the subject. Because scholarly historians have pretty much thoroughly rejected this thesis.
There are scholarly historians involved.
Not very many. The numbers are not good, Crispin. The numbers don't look good.
I haven't done a statistical analysis. It might break down by race to some extent, right? Now that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now that would be interesting, right?
Yeah, but it doesn't.
Okay. Yeah. No, that's true too. Actually, I've seen some black critiques.
Glenn Lowry is like part of a whole group of black scholars, historians and stuff, who are saying this is just ideological history. It's not
fair,
right? Okay. Anyway, go on. I don't want to get in the weeds of that. Go on.
Right now, and like I say, maybe I'm not doing the standpoint a lot of good by associating it with this, but I was just reading it over the last few days for the first time. I think there's a lot of really good stuff in it, actually, and a lot of good history in it, and it twisting the frame around like that, even though no particular fact actually was that shocking or whatever, like changing the point of view from which we are narrating it changed my sense of it a little bit. And I think that I don't think it's entirely implausible. And I don't think that that's actually quite a factual question. Right.
When the founding of the country is not really an empirical question. You're right.
No, that's right. And so I think like that shows the value, but it shows like not the, in some ways it shows the value and it shows the problems that arise. But if you recenter who's giving the narrative, you're liable to change the narrative. Yeah, and definitely, like if you're trying to, like a room full of men dealing with gender issues, the classic Supreme Court problem before Sandra Day O'Connor or something like this. Like, okay, here's 9 guys going to decide on abortion questions or something like this. Now, do they understand what abortion means in the life of a woman? Not yet, man. Not until women can tell their stories and stuff like this, right? And hopefully actually sit down on the Supreme Court and maybe tell people about this, like Ginsburg. So like, and of course it depends on the issue in all this. I wouldn't trust a bunch of white people on race. Like the white science on race in the 19th century or in 1950 was horrendous, man, because there was no check on it. You know what I mean? It was running, it had a runaway self-serving quality that was unconscious.
Let's get it. Let's adjust, because a lot of things are getting bundled together, and I want to examine each of them in piece. So let's actually look at the elements of standpoint theory. And let me challenge you in various ways. Okay, so I mean, here's the first thing that I wonder about, right? So standpoint theory, according to standpoint theory, epistemic privilege, both with regard to questions of value and questions of fact, is positively or negatively affected by one's racial, sex identity, etc. Okay, so the idea is, okay, marginalized people with respect to X are better positioned epistemically, both in terms of understanding of the value implications of whatever it is, and with regard to the facts. Okay, So this is the first thing I want to interrogate. Okay, it is not at all obvious to me. So there's 2 people, right? There's the member of the dominant class who benefits from the state of affairs. Right. So they're happy and, how shall I say, endorsing, right? Then there's the oppressed person who resents the current state of affairs, right? Who dislikes it, who's against it. Okay. I see no reason whatsoever to think that appreciation is a more epistemically distorting position than resentment. Indeed, I could easily see an argument to be made that resentment is more distorting, and therefore that the oppressed person actually has a less clear view than a more clear view. Now, that may not be the case, but that's an empirical question, and I have not seen a damn thing. Empirical evidence-wise to tell me that black people on average have more true beliefs about X, Y, and Z regarding racism than anybody else. And I would be skeptical that you could even conduct such a study, which tells me the hypothesis is unrefutable. Okay. It's one of the, it's an ideological proposition. It's not a philosophical one that I can actually engage with in any sort of serious way.
Okay. First of all, I do think American black people know more about American racism than American white people.
Why should resentment be less distorting than appreciation?
Yes. Okay. All right. Let me give you an example. Masters enslavers in slavery. Okay. And they express appreciation for slavery, right? They're benefiting from it and they defend it.
Right.
And they enjoy it.
Right.
Okay. Now you have Frederick Douglass. who is an enslaved person. Who understands slavery more clearly, or who at least expresses their understanding more clearly? Who really knows what slavery is? John C. Calhoun, who's like, portraying like a happy, cooperative society where everyone benefits, or Frederick Douglass, who's actually been whipped, for learning to read. Now he understands the reality of slavery, and his voice functioned to expose the reality of slavery in a way that no white person was in a position to do, to testify to the reality of slavery. And I say, now resentment is potentially distorting, and appreciation is potentially distorting. But the standpoint structure indicates that systematically, features of the oppressive system are concealed from people who benefit from that system.
What I'm saying is that is ostensibly an empirical claim for which I see no empirical evidence, and all I get are anecdotes. And I'm going to give you my own anecdote that points in the opposite direction.
Okay.
Frederick Douglass and slave owners, that's easy, man.
Yeah.
Let me give you some in the opposite direction. All right. That point in the opposite direction. So my point just is ostensibly this is an empirical claim for which no evidence has been provided. Wait a minute. If it's not an empirical claim, then it's an intuitive appeal, and I don't see any reason intuitively to think that appreciation is more distorting than resentment. Okay. Now, I'm going to give you a case that points in the opposite direction.
Okay, good.
All right. So this is a very common experience for people from my community, right? So, there are only a few places in the country where there's a high concentration of Jewish people. Everywhere else, you're kind of a tiny minority. As a matter of fact, much smaller than a black minority or Hispanic minority. In Springfield, Missouri, there are far more blacks and Hispanics than there are Jews. Okay.
Yeah.
Typically in such places, maybe there's one synagogue, there's one place where the Jews sort of congregate, okay? And there's no question that in a town like this, being Jewish is a serious social disadvantage, all right? My daughter, I had to go through – did you leave?
No, I'm coming back. Okay. I'm sorry. My cat is yelling at the window. So
I had to go through, a tearful childhood with my daughter, in which she's coming home and telling me that kids are telling her they can't be friends with her because she's not a Christian. She's coming home and having been made to sing like religious Christmas songs in school. The whole 9 yards. I'm not trying to make a pity party. I'm just trying to give you a sense of the context. Okay. Yeah. All right. So this is the context. And very commonly what happens is in the Jewish enclave, so you all gather around in the synagogue or whatever, the perception of anti-Semitism is, how shall I say, hyperbolic. Okay. Mm-hmm. We see there's anti-Semitism everywhere. We see it everywhere. Everything is interpreted as anti-Semitic. The most harmless nothing in the world is magnified now out of all proportion.
Right.
People are accused of being anti-Semites. Right. If you asked me, hey Dan, does the average, sort of mild-mannered Presbyterian walking down the street in Springfield, Missouri, have a better or worse perception of the amount of actual anti-Semitism in Springfield, Missouri than the people at Temple Israel? I, being a member of Temple Israel, will tell you the Presbyterian guy walking down the street, absolutely 100%. We are seeing anti-Semites under every single fucking bed and in every single closet. And we are magnifying every experience out of all proportion, right? And I would be truthful if I told you that.
Yeah.
Okay. But don't tell me that's not common.
All right. Now, it is common. And the other thing is, though, the way you started that out, though, what happened to your daughter, for example, did indicate that there might be anti-Semitic situations in that culture.
But that doesn't mean that she is
in a way that the average Presbyterian wouldn't acknowledge at all, right?
But it doesn't mean that
doesn't
she
even know.
But it doesn't mean that she has a clearer view of it.
I think potentially, like, you have resources for understanding a clear understanding of the anti-Semitism there. You have, but I definitely any particular. So let's start with let me pull back for a second on standpoint. The idea is that all knowledge is from some standpoint. Okay, let's start with that. Like there's no unsituated knowledge. Every piece of knowledge is some group or some individual's piece of knowledge. There's no standpointless perspective. Okay, and so then, and a lot of these standpoint epistemologists take themselves to be kinds of objectivists, really, and they're talking about maybe even assembling standpoints as the way to expose the objective truth, because no single standpoint is entirely trustworthy in this regard, because everyone has its distortions. Everyone is well suited to expose some sorts of facts and actually probably depends on repressing others, each standpoint. Now, and so it's potentially almost symmetrical, right? Like different standpoints have different epistemic resources and different epistemic disabilities. And potentially resentment is epistemically disabling, especially at a certain point. But I guess the political oomph of the standpoint thing is like there's a systemic difference in these things, just at least in understanding the actual structures of oppression. And these might have actual other implications. So, for example, Donna Haraway, when she got started with this, it was exposing what had gone wrong with primatology, where like almost 100% white male scientific community went and basically found 50s dating behavior in chimpanzee communities all over Africa, right? Like, found that the female chimps kind of sat back and selected among the males who were showing off for her and stuff like this. And that turned out to be just a complete, distortion, really, of the observations, and she demonstrated that, and actually many others did too. But so the fact that they were doing that they were distorting their own research in this way was invisible to this unanimous community of heterosexual dudes or whatever. So if they'd had a few female voices rolling through there, they might have done better on this. So that's a sort of common sense, or practical, or I don't know if it's empirical, but at least you can roll the examples, I suppose, or something.
Well, you can roll the examples, but the question is whether there's any sort of real valence that they point towards. And what I'm saying is, look, if the claim is an empirical claim, then I want to see the evidence. I want to see the evidence that X's have more true beliefs about things pertaining to this than Y's do. And as far as I'm concerned, there's no such evidence that I can see from any of the standpoint stuff I've read. Now, if it's not meant to be an empirical
what do you
claim,
want?
then it comes down. Well, listen, that's the
do you want
survey data that sociologists take all the time. Let's see.
So how about we poll on the criminal justice system? Okay, I mean, if we did that 10 years ago or whatever.
Yeah, but remember, we're talking about epistemic privilege with respect to questions of value and questions of fact. Okay, so we have to split them up, right?
Okay.
What I'm going to suggest is that with regard to questions of value, resentment and appreciation are equally distorting, and it's going to depend on the individual cases, which is more. Okay.
Okay.
With regard to matters of fact, I'm going to reject the idea that position trumps standard conceptions of professional expertise. All right. Now, in the absence of those two, I see no room left for the damn thing. Okay? I just don't. And so what it winds up becoming is a hardball, brass knuckles political weapon is what it becomes. And this is why I dislike it. All right? This is really what it comes down to. So I want to interrogate the merits of it, because if there are merits to it, I'm going to accept it, Crispin, right? If there are merits to it, I'm going to accept it. But what I'm seeing, to me, it's just a way to fight dirty. It's just a method of dirty fighting in the political arena, and that I don't accept. Right? I do not accept that. So
right now, it shouldn't say straight up that identity, like being in a certain group or whatever, trumps expertise. Okay, like it shouldn't do that. That would be a mistake. Okay.
With regard to matters of fact.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Definitely. It might raise suspicions about expertise. That is the way who's the kind of person that gets, first of all, rises in the hierarchies or the bureaucracies to be acknowledged as an expert, and from what standpoint, if there is no standpointless standpoint, do they speak? And so these standpoint epistemologists talk about the construction of the neutral observer, and I think you are postulating such an observer, when you say that, you want, statistical evidence on this or whatever, like, well,
I want if a claim is if the claim is being made that is empirical, then I want evidence. Right. All right. So if the claim that's being made, expertise, you're not. I think you're like not allowed to just lean on a simple concept of expertise, because that also is in question here. Well, but I don't think anyone. Yeah. Maybe. So who gets credentialed? But this is not to say like. You can be entirely ignorant of some area and just be a member of a certain group, and so that your pronouncements, your half-assed pronouncements should count more than, a professor. With regard to who gets to be a professor? With regard to matters of fact, all right? So let's put the question of values aside. Here's what I'm getting at with regard to matters of fact. I am the son of Holocaust survivors, okay? I've had endless conversations with people who were in concentration camps, right? Who were subjected to mass deportation, who were subjected to, forcible starvation, all this stuff. All I have to do is talk to my mother, okay? I'm the son of somebody who was a child soldier, who was essentially at war when he was 15 years old. Okay, all of that, right? Now, if you asked me, do you have more expertise with regard to matters of fact concerning German anti-Semitism and the Holocaust than a Gentile Holocaust scholar? My answer is absolutely not.
Right, okay.
Okay? Now, in my opinion, the way I'm seeing standpoint epistemology deployed in actual discourse, that is exactly what's being asserted about black people, about LGBT plus QIA, whatever the hell it is, about all of this sort of stuff. I'm seeing exactly that claim made. I'm a trans person, and I have more epistemic privilege over a goddamn person who's an MD and who's done all of his scholarly research in sex and gender, right? To the point to which, we're gonna, the testimony of such people is gonna cause those people to lose their credentials or lose their licenses or no longer be taken seriously in the discourse, right? So what I'm saying is I see no reason to think that my standpoint makes me more expert with respect to the relevant matters of fact than someone who is credentialed in the traditional way that we've always been doing for the last freaking several hundred years, all right? So again, I don't buy
the classical period of racism and sexism, man. And so
that's fine as a slogan, but it does not respond to the specific point that I just made about my own expertise.
Yes. Let me try the trans example, just running some.
Well, Well, why don't you, do you mine? Can you explain in what sense I know more about the Holocaust than a guy who that's his professional area of research? He's been doing it for 30 years. He's written books.
You know a lot more about what it was like.
Really? Than he does, despite the fact that he's got 20 hours of footage, let's say the Shoah documentary, of interviewing and doing research and finding documents and going to the damn places, okay? And maybe interviewing the Germans who were involved in it. I don't think that I have better understanding of that either. I don't.
You're disintegrating into your background, which is kind of interesting.
But what I'm saying is I don't think I have more expertise with regard to any of those things.
Okay, fair enough. All right.
Do the trans one if you want. I just didn't want you to avoid my case because I'm saying I don't have standpoint expertise. I'm denying it to myself, Crispin. And I could claim it. I could claim discursive advantage in all sorts of conversations. I do not. Because I don't believe I have it.
What role do you think Jewish scholars and Jewish voices have had in conveying the reality of the Holocaust and preserving it in this, I think it's awfully central. So I think that's kind of similar, for example, to Black voices dealing with slavery in the 1619 Project, for example. Now, okay, so here's something that a trans person might see about the doctors who have spent their whole careers on gathering statistics on gender and so on. And that is,
I'm listening.
Yeah. So this is interesting. Like, who has the best point of view on gender? I can sort of see an argument that a trans person has a pretty good standpoint on this. And one thing you might point out, a trans person might point out to this doctor, who might not even be conscious of this quite unbelievably, is that the doctor himself has a gender identity. That he is himself speaking from a particular point of view. That his gender identity gives him stakes of all sorts, psychological and even financial, in how the research comes out. It structures at every stage what he notices and what the whole community fails to notice. So that pretty soon you've got a whole body of objective gender science provided by all, like cisgender people, and kind of like emphasizing, for example, the naturalness of the gender binary and the inevitability of it, and hence the sort of unnaturalness of its violation, and so on. Similarly with race science. Like I've just been teaching this piece by Frederick Douglass where he dismantles the race science of 1854. And this is an objective discourse. It's, these are trained scholars that are rolling Germany and France and England with their theories that there are 4 or 5 races and that they have different cranial capacities, different moral proclivities. And they think they've just demonstrated this empirically. And what Frederick Douglass says is, you know what? Every bit of that literature is self-congratulation, actually. I'd be suspicious on that to begin with, okay? Like that would make you at least go like, okay, conflict of interest. So let's dismantle the research from that point of view, But you're going to have to dismantle the research. It's not enough to go like, I'm Black or whatever, and, so you're wrong. It has to be an actual epistemic exchange, but the claim is that like Frederick Douglass or whomever is liable to have, or a trans person maybe even, I haven't really run this through standpoint epistemology, is liable to have resources, possibilities that they can see that would contribute to a fuller and more accurate picture if it's fed into empirical procedures and so on,
Okay, let's move on to another thing I'm wondering about. All of this so far has been about whether standpoints actually convey epistemic advantage. I'm very dubious that they do. You're more inclined to think that they do. But now I want to raise a different question. And that is, I don't think that standpoints have any determinate valence, right? What winds up happening, it seems to me, is that the standpoints that people claim for these groups are simply the ones that are the views of the members of those groups that they already agree with, right? So if somebody says to you in a progressive race conversation, right, let's center black voices in this conversation. Yeah. Which black voices are they going to center? They're not going to center Shelby Steele, Glenn Lowry, and Thomas Sowell, okay? Sure. They're going to center Ibrahim, whatever his name is, and Hannah Jones and all these other people, right? Now, what's the black standpoint on race? Thomas Sowell's or Hannah, what's her face? Nicole Jones. Which one is the black standpoint, Crispin?
Well, I guess they're
contradictory. They can't both be the black standpoint. So which one's the black standpoint?
Well, they are standpoints they're both standpoints of black people.
Right, but which is the one that should be centered in our discourse, and why?
I don't want to go majoritarian on this or something.
Well, of course, but that's what they're going to want to say, right? But of course, you can see why that would be a disaster, right? So what is supposed to be the valence of these standpoints? Because I don't believe there are any, and I think with every population, there are some very, very strong trans voices that reject categorically this whole gender fluidity thing. They say, no, I am a male, I am a female, I am dysphoric, and I'm trying the best I can to live as the opposite sex, but that doesn't make me it, right? So completely. I want to know what the valence of a standpoint is supposed to be, who decides what it is, and therefore which voices from the standpoint are going to be the ones that we center.
Absolutely. And this is really like a serious and totally practical problem. And this has really been a problem in the feminist movement and the anti-racism movement. Okay. Who speaks for us?
Right.
Right. So unbelievable struggles on this in the feminist movement, right? Black women's voices or, anti-abortion fenomists or, and disqualifying people.
Look at the current Supreme Court nominee and what people. I cannot believe the kind of sexist attacks on her from people who are supposedly would be the first ones to jump on board of feminist of female standpoint, right?
Right, and yes, and then you start getting into some really problematic shit. Where, Barrett, what's her name? Amy Coney Barrett is suffering from false consciousness and stuff like this. She's taking up a male standpoint, right? Because she's been polluted. Right. And that's a Marxist move.
Right. How does this not simply so pollute this whole approach to discourse so that it's salvageable?
Yes. Okay. So the way I guess I would
try to think of it. Let's now talk about an idealization. I'm not going to saddle you with fixing the world. So tell me how intellectually you could see us preserving the ideas behind standpoint that you like and overcoming this kind of problem.
Right. Okay. So I think that, you can take it atomistically in a way, and in some ways each individual has their own standpoint, and I think that should be acknowledged. But then I think you've got to acknowledge that there's some commonality of experience among, to some extent, members of the same community, the same neighborhood, in a place where race is as enforced as it has been in the U.S. We've got to acknowledge that there are commonalities as well as differences, but these group identities as enforced socially do shape characteristic styles of individual experience. Like if you grew up in Jim Crow segregation in the South or something like that, you know what I mean? Like you have an experience in common with a lot of people. Now, you may disagree on the interpretation of that experience. And I think that's who counts as in the group and what views or who speaks for the group and stuff like this, if anybody does. These are constantly flowing, contested things. And I think if your wish was that these groups would disintegrate rather than coalesce, you know what I mean? Like, and have less power through the whole culture because they divide us horribly, I think that'd be rational, right? And I think that if you worry that things like Standpoint would have the opposite effect, that they'll attempt to, or you can't even articulate them because you violate people's.
Yes, I mean that's listen. My worry is that Standpoint theory is part of a bundle of ideas that are contradictory to the basic values of the Enlightenment, and for all of its flaws, I think that that's the only place where any sort of salvation for decent society is going to lie.
Right.
Otherwise, we're going to fucking turn into Yugoslavia, and we're turning into Yugoslavia right now. And it's not being helped. It's not being helped. It's being exacerbated by this way of thinking. And all that's happened is now that the white people are now doing it too. Okay? Right? I mean, the white people now, they yes. You know, this is the Standpoint epistemology is the greatest gift to Trumpers that I could ever imagine, right? Because, you know, they're just going to jump on the train, right?
You mean as critics or just with their own identity?
Listen, I already have in my university evangelical Christians, right, who are absolutely completely dominant in this town, right, but who are not dominant culturally on the university campus. Okay.
Yes.
I've already got and have concrete examples of evangelical Christians playing this game in the opposite direction, saying
yes.
they're being discriminated against, saying they're being disadvantaged in the
yes.
classroom by liberal professors. We even had a lawsuit, Crispin, where a social work program was trying to make its students do in labs what social workers actually do, one of which involved something to do with gay couples accessing social services. An evangelical student objected that this was punishing her and forcing her to violate her conscience, and she won a freaking lawsuit against the university. Okay, so all that I'm saying is that, look, in my view, whatever credibility and good ideas there are to this are so outweighed by the damage it's doing to an already very tattered Enlightenment ideal that we're right. trying to operate under, that it is the worst possible thing we could be doing right now, right? Right now, right. What we should be fighting for is dispassion, not increased passion. What we should be fighting for is being skeptical about one's own point of view, not assuming it's correct, right? In other words, all the basic values that you learn in every goddamn 101 critical thinking class is the opposite of what Standpoint theory tells you to do. The opposite.
All right. Well, I think that's a little too simplistic, I think. Like the way Sandra Harding.
Avoid motivated thinking. What the hell is Standpoint epistemology? It is to lionize motivated thinking.
All right. No, I think we exchanged something like this on Twitter. It is to expose motivated thinking. Like the motivated thinking.
Only the other guys. Only the other guys, not your own.
Yeah. Okay. True. Right. And someone else is going to have to expose yours, I guess, probably.
But you were not allowed to because you're epistemically positioned lower than them.
Okay. But let me say one thing. I am suspicious of Enlightenment values in many ways. And I do think they have fed in interesting ways an era of racism and sexism.
We did a whole dialogue on that. Yeah, we did a whole dialogue on that. Yeah.
Yes, but I also see why you're attracted to them and see why you think it's the last guardian of decency too. Because I think that individual rights concept, for example, is got to be centralized in a lot of ways. But anyway,
yeah.
But there is a profound or like a very pointed attack on the Enlightenment, if we want to think about it this way, in standpoint epistemology. So because there's an attack on this neutral point of view, there's an attack on the possibility of unmotivated thinking. Like here it coincides with some of the sociology of science stuff, like the Bruno Latour, where, like we start saying like, well, here are the funding mechanisms that led to this research. Okay. Here's how the self-interest of the researchers was reflected in the results, though they were quite certain that they were neutral, scientists or whatever. Science is a human activity. Okay. And knowledge is like I said earlier, like always somebody's knowledge. Now we can start arguing about what role group identities play in that. And it might be, too much in some way. I mean, it's too much right now, I think, in some ways. Like, I think
I think it's also, listen, I listed a bunch of things that I think are characteristic of our current times, all of which it seems to me the only possible solution to is something alike Enlightenment values, and of which standpoint is the worst thing you could do. So let me just list them, okay? We're currently characterized by polarization, loss of faith in institutions, and especially those that confer or involve expertise and authority, right? We no longer believe experts, right? Why? Partly because they've politically compromised themselves by taking these kinds of stands, right?
Well, I think we better be suspicious of so-called experts. I mean, I'm going the other way on this one, man.
So you think
I'm not taking the Harvard faculty and going like, whatever you say, man.
But wait a minute. But the opposite. But what's the I mean, the problem is that we've swung in the opposite direction, right? So to where now people don't trust medical experts, right? Because they came out and said, it's fine to spread coronavirus so long as you're doing it for a politically viable cause, right? Otherwise, remember they signed all these. They signed a letter
on the protest.
Yeah.
All right. Well, but that's only one reason why we're doubting medical experts, because a lot of them are trying to serve Trump or compromise with Trump's views on the virus or something. There's all kinds of reasons, but that's typical, of experts. They're motivated, man, and they're human, and they have a particular standpoint, and they're bright, and there might be white guys.
The point is,
especially if you're writing in the 80s.
Yeah, but Crispin, the point is, what is it that you are endeavoring, or what is the ideal you're striving towards? Not what is the one you accomplish, because you don't accomplish any ideal. The question is, what are you striving towards, right? And it seems to me that in a time of polarization, in a time of mutual antipathy, in a time when nobody trusts each other and nobody trusts any authorities or experts, one should be aiming at greater objectivity, greater dispassion, more self-doubt, not less. Okay?
Yes.
And everything that standpoint theory tells us to do is the opposite of those things.
I disagree with that, though. Like, if you wanted to sort of get a standpoint idea,
my position should be privileged over the other guys. That's what it is.
Now, okay, if you wanted to get like an overall epistemic sort of standpoint ideal, it's people from many standpoints having input into how we're interpreting the data, or how the basic categories are being articulated that we bring to the data. And stuff like this. Like, it would be a dialogic model where different standpoints are in dialogue and acknowledging each other's strengths and each other's disabilities or something like that. Now, it's not being used that way right now, usually. Although there's a lot of talk about dialogue and bringing people together to speak or whatever. But I don't think that, it's not that kind of irrationalism, I guess. I don't think. In Harding's mode or Haraway's mode, they're trying to reconstruct, they think of themselves as realists about the world, and they're trying to reconstruct a sort of objectivity by assembling of various standpoints on the same data set. And including articulating the basic concepts that we bring to the set of experiences or something like that.
I mean, look, maybe we just just to sort of fundamentally disagree at a more basic level. But to my mind, if you describe the situation to me as follows, say, look, we're at a time now when people hate each other's fucking guts. Okay. And don't trust each other, and don't trust so-called neutral parties. Now, what should we do about that? It seems to me my answer would be we should caution people to beware the distorting influence of their own perspective.
Yes.
What standpoint epistemology instructs us to do is the opposite. It's to identify the distorting influence of the other guy's perspective and to privilege one's own perspective. That is exactly the opposite of what I would advise people to do when everybody hates each other.
Okay. Can I say what effect it had on? Yeah. Can I say what effect it had on me?
Sure.
It made me much more self-critical, and I guess now we're in a moment of white self-criticality. And I bet these are not terms that you love, but so like for me, I was not able to believe of myself that I was a sexist until I was in dialogue with these kind of texts and a woman who pointedly taught them to me. Okay, since then, I've been seeing the layer upon layers of sexism in my head that I had no idea about, really, just growing up an American boy in the 70s. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't have any particular...
Give me an example.
I think the way I treated women for much of my life had a lot of, like, real fucked up gender shit in it. And I think I will never quite understand it all. But, you know, like just the way I leered at women for much of my life, you know, just like, I mean, not that I, you know, or just the way I objectified women, you know what I mean? Like, or just, and the way at times I have treated women. Like, I needed to be called on that. And I couldn't have provided that for myself. And neither could my male friends have provided it for me. Like, I wrote my book, Act Like You Know, in the 90s. And I was trying to peel back and understand whether I was a racist. I was a white guy, as I identified socially, I guess, or whatever, in a mostly black city. And so the approach I thought I needed to take, and I think I learned a lot this way, was by examining what black people had said about white people, including people like Douglass, Zora Neale Hurston, Malcolm X, you know, Du Bois. And it made me conscious of my social location and my belief set. It made me much more self-critical about many attitudes, even visceral, seemingly involuntary responses I had to black people and stuff like this. Like, it induced a lot of self-reflection in me. But maybe you're saying it induces the opposite of self-reflection in the people whose standpoints are supposedly privileged in this structure. But
yes, I would say that. And B, I would point out to you that, you know, if I picked a different group of black intellectuals to have you encounter, you would have come to a very different conclusion.
I tried to read, like, comprehensively an African-American autobiography. And you know, including... Because,
you know, Shelby Steele is going to reject an awful lot of the narrative that you just described. Thomas Sowell is going to reject a lot of the narrative that you just described. Glenn Lowry is going to reject a lot of the narrative that you just described.
I'm talking about me.
Right. What I'm saying is they're going to reject your self-flagellation as an expression of something that they think would take seriously or think is warranted, right? Now, listen, I don't know how much of a racist you were. All that I'm saying is that
I had a lot. It's
telling to me that the people you all listed all pretty much point in a single direction.
No. If you like Zora Neale Hurston's politics,
I didn't hear Zora Neale. I didn't hear that one in your list. I'm sorry.
Well, I don't know if I said Zora. She was a central figure. Or even Malcolm X's politics are not like straight up leftist or something, at least not until maybe the very last phase.
No, but look, they're all gonna embrace a kind of very strong version of the systemic racism narrative that a lot of black dissenting thinkers are gonna say is wildly overstated, right? And I don't have a personal view on this. It's not a major area of interest of mine. All that I'm saying is that I'm not hearing anything that really, in my view, engages strongly with the sort of the relevant, the various criticisms I've made. I've not heard anything that really overwhelms the point that I find and overwhelms the point regarding the equally potentially distorting influences of resentment and appreciation. I don't see anything, you agreed, you concurred on the issue of expertise with regard to matters of fact, that standpoints don't grant you anything that necessarily overrides something that one could acquire through the traditional ways of acquiring expertise, and that is scholarly investigation.
No, I think there are things that you can acquire from certain standpoints that you can't acquire by expertise.
Regarding matters of fact? Regarding matters of fact? Not matters of value, matters of fact.
Well, yes, depending on what you count as matter of fact. I mean, you can master all the statistics. But I'm also going to query the basic categories that you're bringing to the statistics. But anyway, but like I say, like also facts about what it's like. One end or another. But I don't know if that's matter of fact or it's not quite a matter of value, or I don't know. It's the kind of data that might be relevant to understanding the racial situation in the U.S. or something like that, I guess.
Yeah.
But I mean, I see what you're saying.
And let me ask you honestly, let's put aside the intellectual merits of it for a second, okay? Do you think that this sort of thing is good for us right now? In the situation we find ourselves in, horribly polarized, we've got a president who polarizes everything 1,000 times more just by his awful, horrific, godforsaken behavior. We're at each other's throats. The major news organs have lost a lot of credibility because they've been either caught in various scandals or they've engaged in behavior that makes people question their objectivity in even the reasonable sense, not the utopian sense of objectivity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Is what we need now standpoint, or is what we need now a plea to return to some effort to return to some sort of Enlightenment values? I don't know. To me, I say the same thing about the Enlightenment or liberalism as I do as Churchill said about democracy. It's the worst political philosophy except for all the others, right? As flawed as conceptions of neutrality and objectivity and all that it is, they're fucking better than Yugoslavia, okay?
Okay, if those are the options, though, that's
but that's what I'm asking you. Is this what we need now, or is this just going to hasten our turning into Yugoslavia?
Well, like earlier on in this particular phase, like in the race thing, I was very hopeful about this, just in the sense that I do think like a moment of white self-reflection is really needed. I mean, I was kind of rolling down this road in the 90s in a similar way. But at this point, I'm a little skeptical, first of all, how effective it's actually going to be, in ameliorating I certainly believe in structural racism, the systemic racism that we're in. It might not have great effects ultimately. And yes, it's leading to, I guess there's conflicts within leftism, for example, along these lines, in the Biden coalition kind of, yes, it's polarizing in various ways. I would worry about the alternatives, though, for recoalescing. Like, I don't want to think about it like as sort of like just a reimposition of structures of epistemic authority as they existed previous to this, because I think there's important aspects of this. But yes, it is one of the things having polarizing effects right now in a world that really is kind of exploding.
I am not and would never want to saddle standpoint theory with our disintegration. I am not saying that standpoint theory is turning us into Yugoslavia. That's, I think, ridiculous and unfair, right? What I'm saying
but I see why you think it's kind of balkanizing, right?
What I'm saying is, if you are in the process of turning into Yugoslavia, is standpoint theory the way to prevent it? And what I'm saying is, I don't see how that is. If you're turning into Yugoslavia, the worst thing you could possibly do is tell anyone that their viewpoint is beyond criticism or privileged, right? Anyone,
right? Okay, and I don't want to. Yeah, I don't think the thoughtful standpoint of epistemologists would say that, that anyone's position is above criticism.
Yeah, well, look, and that's why I said I'm not really criticizing an idealized version. And I'm not satirizing the theorists with the current version. I'm not going on saying, Rebecca Kukla, you're turning America into Yugoslavia.
And I'm not defending all the effects.
No, and I know you're not.
Not all the expressions.
I know you're not. Whether or not there is some useful, purely in the intellectual academic sphere, notion of standpoint epistemically, I will grant is probably still an open question, although I do really have questions about both the value side, that's the stuff about resentment versus appreciation just being distorting, and I do have questions on the matter of fact side, but I do think it's still an open question because some of the examples you give obviously are commonsensical, right? I mean,
and there's been a lot of work on this, and there's still work to do. Even giving a coherent sense of what a single standpoint is, or a singular or a coherent standpoint is, or what these groups are.
Yeah,
I mean,
but I don't think it's
maybe it can't be done.
I don't think though, right, that it is doing us any good in terms of the way it's being practically deployed on the ground in discursive spaces. It's just making people even more hostile to each other.
I think it's having mixed effects. But yes, I see why you say that.
I'd love to, if you can point me quickly somewhere where you think it's having a good effect on the ground.
Right.
I'd love to hear it.
Maybe we should finish this up in a way, but I'm bringing it back to the 1619 project. I think it's I think it's got a lot of good work in it. I also think some of the effects were just disastrous.
So you think it is having some good effects on ground level discourse?
I do. And even with regard to the disagreements, right? Like I think hearing Sean Wilentz or whoever it may be, black or white, reflecting on this and kind of replying to it is actually a very good exercise too. In other words, this is a super mild form or an unobjectionable form where I just say that was a valuable moment in the unfolding interpretation of U.S. history, potentially. Or was it just an imposition of a politically correct ideology?
Yeah.
If that's what it's going to be, if now this is officially what happens in all the schools or something like that. At that point, I start getting the heebie-jeebies, man. And and then it's time to start bringing in other standpoints again. Maybe.
I was going to mention the fact that I could agree with you that 1619 is an interesting and worthy intellectual exercise, but you do realize it's now being put into fifth grade curricula.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, which I think I wouldn't mind my fifth grader being taught it, but I don't want it sort of imposed as a national history curriculum or something like that either, Yeah. And then then someone like Wilentz is discredited, and his interpretation of U.S. history can't appear anymore in U.S. textbooks or something.
Yeah.
That's stupid, that's.
Yeah. Although that, of course, you would correctly point out, that is not the fault of the standpoint theory, right? That is the fault of people being bad, right? I mean, it's just sort of I think that's fair. I think that's fair. Well, all right. I appreciate you engaging me with me on this.
Likewise.
I hope that the rest of your semester. Are you guys ending at Thanksgiving, or are you going to come back?
We're ending. What about y'all?
My school is not, which I think is insane, but since I'm not teaching on campus, it doesn't affect me. My daughter is at Indiana University in Bloomington, and they are ending at Thanksgiving, which I'm grateful for. So, stay healthy.
You too.
Keep publishing. By the way, I'm going to link, if you don't mind, Crispin's been linking to his video lectures for his online courses on Twitter. Do you mind if I put a few links in?
Sure, that'd be great. Because
I've been enjoying watching them, and I think people would enjoy watching them too. So stay well, Crispin, and I'll see you the next time around.
Best to you and yours, man.
All right, man. Ciao.
See ya.